Well, what a fate you've chosen for yourself. Welcome, intrepid listeners, to the Bleak Corners, the Occult Sideshow. Remember the name Abraxas that popped up in the last episode of the Incredible Two-Hearted Horror Show? Well, buckle up, dear listeners, because as promised, this journey into the history of Abraxas takes us on a winding road of Gnostic cults, demonic makeovers, and even a cameo by Mr. Crowley himself. Before we get started, as always, there will be a few spoilers and screenshots of the movie in this video, so watch that first, alright? Alright. Now, on with the show. Abraxas. Sounds like the name of a cough syrup you'd find in a haunted pharmacy, doesn't it? Yet, this name has echoed through centuries, whispered in forgotten tongues and scrawled on ancient texts. It's a word that's been interpreted, reinterpreted, and twisted until its meaning disappears into the iconography still preserved today. But before we unravel the tangled threads of Abraxas' history, let's go back to the 1st and 2nd century. Here we find the Gnostics, a title posthumously applied to a motley crew of mystics and intellectuals coming up around the early Christians, who saw the world not as a divine creation, but as a flawed construct made by a lesser god, the demiurge. Many of these groups also believed that a divine spark resided within each of us, trapped in this imperfect material world. And for the Gnostics, salvation lay not in blind faith, but gnosis, or secret knowledge, that could liberate this spark and reunite it with its divine source. In their complex cosmology, Abraxas emerges as a central figure. Some saw him as a supreme being, the great archon, the source of all emanations, which are basically just externalized facets of the true God. While others viewed him as a powerful yet not ultimate entity. It all depends upon who you ask, really, and honestly, even the Gnostics couldn't really agree on much. Case in point, some texts even hint at a connection between Abraxas and the Demiurge, the very entity that they believed to be the architect of our flawed existence. It's a paradox wrapped in an enigma, sprinkled with a healthy dose of socio-political angst. But depictions of Abraxas in Gnostic texts and on amulets are as enigmatic as the figure himself. He's often portrayed as a human with the head of a rooster, symbolizing vigilance and the dawn of knowledge, light equaling knowledge, the light bulb going off and all that good stuff. His legs are serpents, representing both wisdom and the seductive dangers of the material world. Sometimes he's even shown wielding a whip, symbolizing power, or perhaps even the urgency to break free from the illusion of our everyday world. This bizarre and contradictory imagery reflects the Gnostic understanding of the universe as a place of conflicting forces, where light and darkness, good and evil, all are intertwined. The Gnostics were also obsessed with a specific Greek version of numerology, especially a guy named Basilides of Alexandria, the home of the biggest library in the ancient world. Well, anyway, Basilides and his Gnostic cult held that there wasn't just one heaven, but 365 heavens, and the number 365 conveniently matching the numerical value of Abraxas in Greek. Alpha is 1, Beta is 2, Rho is 100, Sigma is 200, and Psi is 60. All of these adding up to 365. And this wasn't just a coincidence to them. It was a cosmic code that they had discovered. But, as with all things mystical, this truth was shrouded in layers of symbolism and hidden meanings to obscure it from the uninitiated, those without gnosis. Now, fast forward to the 4th century, when the early church fathers, threatened by the Gnostic challenge to their authority, due to the Gnostics' personal and individual connection to God, began to actively demonize the Gnostics and their beliefs. And by the time demonological texts like Jacques Collin Duplan's Dictionnaire Infernal appeared in the 1800s, Abraxas had undergone a complete transformation. He was no longer a nuanced symbol of Gnostic thought, but a full-fledged demon, depicted with grotesque features, warping his previous iconography and associating them with evil. This demonization, as usual, was a deliberate tactic to discredit Gnostic teachings and reinforce the Church's dominance. The name, or even the word itself, Abraxas, is still a puzzle to this day. Some scholars trace it back to the ancient Egyptian roots, a corrupted phrase meaning the hallowed name. Others point to Greek magical traditions where similar sounding words appear in spells and incantations in the PGM, or the Greek magical papyri as it's been come to be known. Whatever the case, it's clear that through context that the word held power long before the Church decided to weaponize it. But even with his newly acquired demonic status, Abraxas still had his admirers. People even wore amulets inscribed with his name during the medieval period, believing in their protective and healing powers. Perhaps the allure of forbidden knowledge and a personal connection with the divine that could save them from the terrible circumstances outweighed the fear of damnation. Fast forward again, and Abraxas catches the eye of none other than good old Uncle Al himself, Aleister Crowley, the notorious occultist. Crowley saw Abraxas as a symbol of power and transcendence, a key to unlocking hidden truths. He incorporated the name into his magical formula of Thelema, the central tenet of his philosophy, which he believed represented the Aeon of Horus, a new age of self-realization and liberation from restrictive morality. Crowley saw Abraxas as a representation of the HGA, the Holy Guardian Angel, a higher self for a divine guide, which I could do a whole other video about. But now we arrive at our movie. Abraxas shows up in his Gnostic form quite a few times in different scenes, but mostly during the flashbacks that Jack has at the end. And now that we've had a brief overview of its history, we can take a second look at another layer of commentary intertwined with the plot. We'll begin by remembering Lily's words, that our possessing spirit, Mr. Wriggles, may not be the devil or Abraxas, but rather a minor deity serving towards a greater cause. This echoes both the demonic powers attributed to Abraxas in the grimoire traditions, which says, "They placed under his command several orders of jinn, who presided over the 365 heavens." But also the Gnostic perspective that creates the hierarchy, placing Abraxas as the god of the realm in which the lesser beings, including the demiurge who thinks he is God, exists. What's interesting is that whether we approach Abraxas as a god or a demon, these perspectives still assign him a position of authority over a great deal of lesser entities, and presumably that includes Mr. Wriggles. Later, when Lily acquiesces to the control of her possessing spirit on film for the first time, June states that they're trying to better understand what its purpose is, to which it responds by realizing that Jack is also there with them and reminds him of their encounter at the Grove. This lets us in on the implication that there is a connection to the cult that Lily was rescued from. Perhaps even that the spirit is the lesser entity of the cult, yet still connected to the greater aspect of it that's associated with the Grove members' success. A lesser god who serves the greater god. At the bloody, electrified conclusion of the broadcast, we see an entity, perhaps even this higher god, take control of Lily that displays such raw power that it makes her begin to glow, and in a literal embodiment of the polarity of Abraxas, Lily's head, where these entities wriggle in and out of, splits in two. Even outside of this overt symbolism, there is an undertone of characters constantly overestimating themselves, similar to the demiurge assuming it's God, only to be overwhelmed by the confusion of a power far greater than itself being presented, reflecting the strength of a god presiding over ants in the 365 layers